At a family dinner, my son-in-law, with a contemptuous sneer, called security. Remove this beggar from the table. He, a haughty manager, had no idea that I was the owner of the company where he works, and that by tomorrow he'd be scrubbing toilets instead of enjoying his cushy corner office. Poor people simply don't understand quality. Brent announced, cutting his rack of lamb with theatrical precision. Welcome back to Dad's Revenge. Glad you're here with me today. If this is your first time, tap that subscribe button so the next story finds its way to you. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something simple. When someone takes your kindness for granted, do you speak up right away, or do you wait and let the truth reveal itself on its own? Drop your answer in the comments. I'd genuinely love to know. One more thing, before we begin, some details in this story have been shaped for the purposes of storytelling. Any resemblance to real people or specific events is entirely coincidental. It's the lesson underneath that truly matters. Look at a price tag, and their whole face goes white. No sense of value, just fear of numbers. My grip tightened around the water glass. There are people in this world who earn what they have, rather than collecting an inheritance and calling it achievement. Around us, the Roanoke Club's dining room hummed with Sunday afternoon pleasantries, the soft music of crystal on china. Between us, silence had pulled itself taut enough to snap. Oh, Warren. Brent's laugh had that particular edge to it, the one that said he found you vaguely pathetic. Hard work and smart work aren't even in the same category. The people who actually get ahead, they invest, they network, they manufacture their own openings. I've had calluses on my hands since before you drew your first breath. And yet, here we are. His knife swept toward the room like a conductor's baton. My parents picking up the check for everyone because they actually built a life worth something. Gerald and Patrice Holcomb settled back in their chairs with quiet pride at their boy's performance. Nadine kept her eyes on her sea base, making sure they never found mine. My daughter, the same girl who used to stand on my feet to reach the kitchen counter, now wore my presence like a stain. What gets built depends on who's doing the building, I said, keeping my voice level. Does it really, though? Brent loosened his posture, that tailored jacket draped just so across his shoulders. Some men raise towers, others just tread water. Something hot climbed through my ribcage. Treading water takes more out of a man than you could ever imagine. Strength. His pitch climbed just enough to pull eyes from neighboring tables. You're calling it strength to run out of money before the month ends? That's not grit, that's a failure to plan. My fork came down against the plate. Say that again. You caught every word. Brent's eyes held that particular gleam, the one that feeds on someone else's pain. You've spent your whole life resenting people who figured it out because you never did. Every syllable landed like a fist. Nadine's head finally lifted, cheeks burning red, but not a single word left her mouth, and that quiet was worse than anything Brent had said. I pushed back from the table, the chair legs shrieking against the hardwood. I was pouring concrete while you were still arguing over which video game to play next. Boy, and look where all that got you. Brent sat unmoved, showing up to dinner at the Roanoke Club in discount rack clothes, getting rattled when someone states plain economic facts. Heads turned across the room. A waiter made a cautious step toward us, then thought better of it when Brent flicked a hand in dismissal. Gerald and Patrice exchanged a glance heavy with anxiety, but stayed out of it. Security! Brent's voice cut through the restaurant with a clean, sharp authority. Would you come remove this man from our table? He's disrupting our evening. Those words drove straight into my chest. Nadine buried her face in both hands. The guard moving toward me had the expression I recognized from job sites, the one men wear when they have to deliver news nobody wants to hear. I let my eyes fall to my daughter one final time. She looked at the tablecloth. You're going to wish you hadn't said that. I told him quiet enough that only Brent heard, and I watched his certainty flicker for just a second. I made my way out my scuffed work shoes, clicking against marble floors, threading between tables full of people who actually belonged there. People whose own sons-in-law didn't have them hauled away like vagrants. The March air outside found every gap in my faded jacket. I folded myself into my rusted Dodge Stratus, hemmed in by vehicles that cost more than my house. My hands wouldn't stay still on the wheel. 4 years since Carolyn's death. 4 years of watching Nadine slip further away. Status pulling her in one direction, blood in the other, and blood losing every time. Tonight hadn't surprised me. It had only confirmed what I'd refused to sit with until now. To my own daughter, I had become something to be managed, an embarrassment on two legs. But Brent and the Holcombs had miscalculated badly. They had looked at me and seen someone without leverage. They'd never been more wrong about anything in their lives. Sleep was out of the question. I made the drive back through streets that had emptied out with Sunday night, and every mile replayed the same reel, each word, each curl of the lip, each second of Nadine's silence. By Monday morning, pale light was pressing through the kitchen blinds, throwing hard lines across the newspaper I hadn't touched. Coffee scalded my mouth. Rage was still working through my system, like a current making the mug shake against my teeth. I couldn't stop seeing it. Brent's smug expression, the guard walking me out the eyes of strangers, tracking me across that room. The phone tore through the quiet. "Dad?" Nadine's voice was already carrying that clipped, impatient note. "Morning, sweetheart. Yesterday. We have to discuss it." Not asking how I was. Not one word of warmth. All business. "You made a scene and humiliated all of us." I put the mug down with more force than I meant to. "Humiliated. Your husband announced to a restaurant full of people that I was a beggar and you think I'm the problem. You blew everything Brent said completely out of proportion. He was talking about financial concepts. That's all, financial concepts." The words barely made it out. He stood up there and mocked people who work with their hands, then had me removed like I was trespassing. You were the one creating a spectacle, yelling half out of your seat like you were about to start something. The exasperation in her voice came through the line like static. The Holcombs were beside themselves. "And what about how your father felt?" Silence. When Nadine spoke again, the warmth had been replaced by something brittle and final. "You owe Brent an apology, Dad. His parents, too. Everyone who had to watch that scene. Apologize for what? For not sitting there and taking it? For behaving like she took a breath, landing the words carefully, like a man who has no idea how decent people conduct themselves. Each word was a separate wound. My own child talking to me like I was a problem she needed to solve. "I'm your father, Nadine, not some inconvenience you need to dispatch. Get Brent on the phone today. Fix this." She hung up. I sat there holding a dead line, something inside me moving past anger into somewhere much colder. A few minutes passed. I opened Instagram, an app I almost never touched anymore. Brent's post was sitting right at the top, 3 hours ago. Sometimes a family dinner is all it takes to remind you that success is more than a bank balance. It's composure. It's knowing the right way to carry yourself. Relatives who can't stomach what you've built will always find a way to make it about them. Grateful tonight for a wife who handled her father's little meltdown with real grace. There are people who rise and people who just simmer. Family is complicated. Stay grateful. Stay classy. 57 likes. Comment after comment from his circle laughing along, congratulating him for his patience, talking about difficult family like it was some shared sport. I pressed my finger to the reply field, hands barely under control. The screen returned a message I hadn't anticipated. "You cannot reply to this post. Blocked." He'd put me on public display for hundreds of people to ridicule, then locked the door on my way to respond. Built himself up as the long-suffering, reasonable man while making sure I couldn't say a single word in return. My phone dropped from my hand and hit the table. 3 years. For 3 years, I had been the quiet engine behind everything they enjoyed, making their lives run smoothly while they treated me like a guest who'd overstayed his welcome. If it weren't so brutal, I might have laughed. But sitting there with that post burning on the screen, something in my chest rearranged itself permanently. What had been hurt was becoming something with an edge to it. They wanted to know what an old man with nothing could do. I was going to answer that question thoroughly. That block screen was its own kind of insult sitting there. But as the heat in me cooled into something deliberate, the memories started coming up sharp, almost comic in how they stung. Because 3 years ago, Brent had been a desperate young man with nothing. He'd sat right across from me at this kitchen table. Same table, hands unsteady, walking me through his situation. "Mr. Delacroix, I know I'm not exactly what most companies are looking for," he'd said, voice barely above a whisper. "But I'll work harder than anyone. I just need someone to give me a chance." Nadine had laid her hand on my arm. "Dad, you know people in construction, maybe somebody there needs a marketing hand." That afternoon, I picked up the phone not to find Brent a job that existed, but to build him one from scratch. Walt Pickard over at Harmon and Associates agreed to play the role of a reference for work Brent had never touched. Diane Kellner at Blue Ridge Marketing put her name to a glowing endorsement of projects that lived nowhere but in the paperwork. Inside, a weak Delacroix Construction's HR department had Brent's application in hand, polished references a portfolio full of work he had never done. I made sure it arrived on the right desk, along with a quiet word about a young man worth watching. Nadine wept with relief the day Brent landed the position. "Dad, I don't know how to thank you for your advice. You always know exactly what to say." Funny how that lands now. But placing him in the door was only the opening move. Over the 3 years that followed, I had quietly constructed every rung of his career. Performance bonuses authorized by me each month. Numbers tied to metrics I had personally told managers to dress up. The company vehicle upgrade that arrived as if by lottery. Paid time off packaged to look like team initiatives. And Nadine's own climb through Delacroix Construction's HR ranks had been no more organic openings appearing right on schedule right when she needed them to. Training programs that conveniently fit around her existing workload, pay raises dressed up as market corrections. I'd burned countless hours papering over Brent's actual performance client grievances about his tone-deaf campaigns that I personally went in and diffused presentation meltdowns I repackaged as growth moments, documentation of his failures that quietly disappeared into administrative reshuffles I'd arranged from above. With each manufactured win, the two of them grew more certain of their own brilliance. They'd started talking about raw business instinct, about having a natural feel for getting ahead. All while I was signing off on authorization after authorization, working the phones, making sure the scaffolding behind their success never showed a seam. Now, staring at Brent's social media performance, the full absurdity of what I'd done hit me like a wave. I had assembled the very creature that just turned on me. Every condescending word at that dinner table, every dismissive wave of his hand, every moment he looked down at me, I'd made all of it possible. They genuinely believed their comfortable lives were the product of talent and drive. What they actually were was the longest-running corporate charity I'd ever funded 3 years at the trough, and they'd learned to bite the hand that fed them. The worst part, not once had either of them paused to wonder about their extraordinary run of good luck. They took each success as confirmation of what they already believed about themselves, that they were the kind of people success simply found. I set the phone down. My fingers weren't shaking anymore. They were still, a different kind of still. For 3 years, I had been their invisible architect, the silent hand arranging every piece. I had handed them everything they owned, every credential they bragged about, every rung they'd climbed, which meant I held the ladder, and I could pull it away just as cleanly. It was time they learned the distance between something earned and something given. 20 minutes later, the elevator doors of the Delacroix Construction building opened on the executive floor, and I stepped out. The drive had done its work. The wounded father had been set aside. What rode up in that elevator was a CEO with a clear head and a specific plan. My assistant glanced up from her desk. "Good morning, Mr. Delacroix. Your 10:30 is ready whenever you are." "Cancel it," I said, not slowing down. "Block out the next 2 hours." In my office, I took my place behind the walnut desk that had anchored 15 years of decisions. The leather armchair settled under me with its familiar give as I brought the computer to life and navigated to files that existed well outside the view of ordinary employees. Brent Holcomb's personnel record spread across the screen. 3 years of carefully massaged performance reviews, inflated numbers, and complaints that had never seen daylight. But beneath that sanitized surface sat the unedited record raw feedback from clients' actual project results, a catalog of failures I had methodically buried. The Morrison account Brent's campaign had been so badly misjudged, it nearly walked $1 million contract out the door. The Riverside project, his marketing materials were so poorly executed, we scrapped everything and started over at company cost. The Northwest expansion, his research was so thin, we lost 6 months chasing directions that went nowhere. Every one of those failures had been my cue to intervene, absorb the damage, redirect the blame, rewrite the narrative. I'd been so committed to keeping my daughter's world intact that I'd stopped protecting the company that made all of it possible. My intercom buzzed. "Curtis, come in for a minute. I need a frank conversation." Curtis Rafferty arrived with the quiet efficiency he always brought, tablet in hand, ready to work. 8 years at my side had made him the most reliable person in the building, and he never wasted words. "What do you need?" "I'm looking hard at the marketing department." Give me your real read on Brent Holcomb's performance, no diplomatic framing. Curtis's face shifted into the careful neutrality of someone who has an honest answer they've been waiting to be asked for. He's certainly got energy, he started. Curtis? I settled back in the leather armchair. Nothing leaves this room. I need the unvarnished version. A brief pause. Then candor one. His output is consistently below standard. Client complaints are a pattern. Deadlines slip. Campaigns come in off target. The team has been absorbing the fallout for a long time now. How absorbed Loretta in graphics has been, quietly rebuilding his presentations for months. Marketing associates have taken to verifying his research themselves because they've stopped trusting it. We've had 2 contracts fall through that traceback directly to his handling. I made notes, kept listening, and that takes a toll on the people around him. When someone produces poor work and the organization doesn't respond, Curtis left it at a shrug. Everyone else starts asking why they're trying so hard. Understood. I closed the file and met his eyes directly. Some changes are coming. After Curtis left, I sat with what I'd heard. Brent wasn't just dead weight. He was quietly corroding the team around him, draining money, draining morale, and not one person had said a word because they assumed he was protected, and he was. They just didn't know by whom. He and Nadine had walked around for 3 years, believing his position was the natural result of who he was. They had no idea the entire thing was a stage set I'd built and maintained out of misplaced love. Time to strike the set. I opened a new document and started typing. Personnel action request, Brent Holcomb position adjustment. Not termination, not yet. I wanted him to feel it arrive slowly, to watch everything he assumed was permanent begin coming loose piece by piece, the same way his words at that restaurant had taken something from me. Before the hour was out, Loretta Dunbar was seated across from my desk tablet, open every inch, the composed HR director she'd been for 5 years. Methodical, discreet, someone who understood that company loyalty was the only loyalty that mattered in that chair. I need to process a personnel action for Brent Holcomb. I told her, my voice even transactional. What type of action, Mr. Delacroix? Demotion from marketing manager to facilities maintenance. Effective immediately. Loretta's fingers paused above her screen for just a moment, her one concession to surprise. For the record, what's the stated basis? Performance deficiencies, repeated client complaints, missed deadlines, substandard deliverables. I moved a folder to her side of the desk. Curtis documented everything last quarter. The demotion is fully supported. She worked through the file, her nods tracking the documented failures I had finally let breathe. What happens to his active projects? Route everything to Diane Kellner. She's been doing the heavy lifting already. I settled back in the leather armchair. Get the paperwork done today. Notification email goes out by 3 o'clock. Loretta left to handle the documentation. I pulled up the security feed on my monitor. Brent was at his marketing department desk, absorbed in whatever filled his mornings, suit perfectly pressed posture, loose with the ease of a man who has never once questioned whether the ground beneath him is solid. He had no idea. At exactly 3:20 p.m., I watched him open his email. The subject line read, Personnel Action Notice Immediate Position Change. Corporate language at its most clinical and devastating. His body responded before his mind caught up, spine-straightening face moving closer to the screen, as if rereading from a shorter distance might produce different words. His lips moved. Effective immediately, you are reassigned from marketing manager to facilities maintenance associate. Your new supervisor will be Hector Vreeland. Report to room C7 tomorrow at 6:30 a.m. for orientation and uniform assignment. I zoomed the camera in on his face. Pure bewilderment. The specific hollow look of someone whose reality has just shifted beneath them with no warning and no explanation. His hands moved unsteadily as he scrolled back through the message, hunting for an error that wasn't there. Then his jaw set and his nostrils flared, and he grabbed his phone with the coiled urgency of someone who has decided there's been a mistake, and they are going to correct it immediately. I watched him dial HR, almost certainly his other hand-cutting gestures toward the screen, as if making his case to an empty room. Loretta's line was engaged naturally. I'd made certain she was tied up in meetings for the rest of the day. Brent tried again. And again. Each unanswered call wound him tighter, his movements pulling away from controlled and towards something more exposed. People in nearby desks were starting to look. He pivoted to email, fingers working the keyboard hard. Every tap carrying the weight of his anger, formal complaints, demands for explanation, escalations to upper management, insistence that a serious error had been made. No error had been made. For 3 years, I had kept the walls up around him, burying the reports, absorbing the client damage, constructing a record of achievement that had no foundation in actual work. I'd built him a career out of whole cloth and convinced everyone, including him, that it was real. Today, I'd pulled the first thread. Watching him unravel in his ergonomic chair while I sat in mine, that was the first clean breath I'd drawn since Sunday night. And it was only the opening move, a small, precise taste of what it feels like to have the floor disappear under you. Without warning, the way his words at that dinner table had disappeared something in me. My phone buzzed. A text from Curtis. Heard about Brent's reassignment. Facilities is going to be interesting. I set the phone down with a quiet smile. Brent was probably already working out how to walk into someone's office and straighten this whole thing out. Good. Let him come looking. I had a great deal to tell him. What I'm about to share changed everything, not just for Brent, but for me. Because there's a moment in every man's life when he has to decide, do you keep protecting someone from the consequences of who they really are? Or do you finally step aside and let the truth do its work? Which would you choose? 40 minutes later, my assistant's voice came through the intercom, amusement barely tucked beneath the professional surface. Mr. Delacroix, there's a very agitated employee out here, insisting on seeing the general manager about an urgent personnel matter. Send him in, I said, easing back into the leather armchair. The door flew open hard enough to shake the frame. Brent Holcomb blew in, face burning with the particular fury of a man who believes he's been wronged. That expensive suit of his was creased from all the pacing he'd clearly been doing. He drew breath to launch into whatever speech he'd rehearsed on the way up, and then stopped cold. The anger on his face shifted through confusion before landing somewhere close to alarm. Warren. His voice didn't quite hold together. What are you doing here? Who's the general manager? I directed him toward the chair across the desk, with the unhurried authority of someone who's run thousands of meetings. Take a seat, please. I don't follow this. Why are you sitting in the executive office? He stayed on his feet, sweeping the room like he expected to find a camera crew or a punchline. Because this office belongs to me. I pulled a folder from the top drawer and laid it on the desk. I own Delacroix Construction Brent. I've always owned it. The blood left his face in one clean wave. That can't be right. You're making this up. I slid the incorporation papers across the walnut surface. Official letterhead, legal seals my signature on every page going back 15 years. Pull up the state business registry if you want to verify it. Warren Delacroix, sole proprietor and CEO. He snatched the documents with unsteady hands and tore through the legal language, lips moving as he read, circling back through the same sections as if the words might rearrange themselves. This can't be real, he breathed, then grabbed for the nearest lifeline. You acquired this recently, right after I was already hired. I founded this company in 2009. You applied for a position that I personally engineered for you in 2021. I leaned forward just slightly. Do you remember Sunday dinner when you had security remove that poor old man who couldn't handle being around success? The papers slipped from his grip and scattered across my desk. No. You're doing this because I made you look bad at dinner. You didn't make me look bad. Brent, you dragged me through the floor in front of my daughter. You called me a beggar and had me walked out of that restaurant like I was a threat to someone. My voice stayed level the whole time, so I decided to give you a first-hand look at what real powerlessness feels like. You can't do this to me. His pitch climbed, desperation bleeding in at the edges. I've put 3 years into this company. I've earned everything I have. Have you, though? I opened a second file. Let's go through your actual record. The Morrison account, your campaign came within a hair of walking $1 million contract out the door. The Riverside project, we scrapped your materials entirely and rebuilt them at company expense. The Northwest expansion, 6 months gone because your research wasn't worth the paper it was on. Each item landed visibly. His shoulders dropped under the accumulating weight of it, the confidence draining out of his posture like water. Every single failure, every complaint, every disaster, I cleaned it up. I killed the reports, patched the client relationships, covered your tracks to keep team morale from collapsing. For 3 years, I was the invisible floor beneath you, while you strutted around convinced you'd built something through your own talent. But Nadine, she's your daughter. You can't burn down your own family. My family came apart the moment you decided I was beneath your contempt. I rose from my chair, slowly letting my full height fill the space above his crumpled posture. You wanted a lesson in the difference between poor people and successful ones. Poor people earn what they have. You've been living on handouts. Brent's face ran through the full cycle fury, then disbelief, then something colder and more calculated. This won't land the way you think. I'll go to Nadine. She'll never forgive you for what you're doing. Go right ahead and call her. Tell her how her husband got sent to the janitorial floor by her beggar father. He retreated toward the door, one finger raised in my direction. This isn't finished. I'll fight it. I'll take legal action. You'll report to facilities maintenance at 6:30 a.m. tomorrow morning. I'd already returned my eyes to the paperwork as though he'd ceased to occupy the room. Hector Vreeland will walk you through your new responsibilities. The door hit the frame hard enough to rattle my coffee cup in its saucer. I reached for my phone, a quiet smile settling in. Time to watch how Nadine absorbed the news. 2 hours after that, I got Clifford Novak on the line, our CFO. The face-to-face with Brent had been gratifying, but exposure alone wasn't going to be sufficient. Real pressure needed to reach the place that hurt most consistently, the bank account. Clifford, I need some cost reduction actions taken tonight. Of course, Mr. Delacroix, which areas are we targeting? Benefits and allowances. Pull every discretionary perk attached to the Holcomb accounts, both Brent and Nadine. Credit cards, vehicle access, housing supplements. All of it effective immediately. I could hear the quick rhythm of keys through the phone. Clifford's efficiency was one of the things I valued most about him. Should I draw up termination paperwork for those employees as well? Not at this stage. Just strip away what they haven't actually earned. I settled back in the chair. Run it all through standard cost reduction protocols. Normal documentation done in 30 minutes. Clifford confirmed it was handled. Corporate cards deactivated. Company vehicle recall queued. Housing payments suspended. 3 years of artificially sustained lifestyle dissolved in a few keystrokes. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in a week. The young couple was about to discover the gap between a fabricated career and a real one. My phone rang as I turned into my driveway. Dad Nadine's voice was fractured with panic. Something's gone wrong with all our cards. They're declining everywhere. The car service called about retrieving the vehicle. What is happening? I took my time getting the front door unlocked and let her alarm run its course. Can you walk me through the specifics of your concern? Don't do that. Brent told me everything. You own the company. You've been pulling every string in our lives. I've been supporting your lives. Those aren't the same thing. Our mortgage payment bounced. The bank called. We can't cover the rent without the housing allowance. Her voice was scaling toward genuine terror. You can't simply switch us off like this. I lowered into my kitchen chair, the same one I'd sat in 3 years earlier when I first made calls to build Brent a career from nothing. The symmetry of it wasn't lost on me. Nadine, you're both working adults. You'll receive exactly what your work is worth, not $1 more. But we can't maintain the house. The car payments, everything we have, is built on charity. Yes, I said quietly. I know. She was crying now. Hard, ugly sobs that didn't compress well over the phone. You're dismantling your own daughter's life, your own family. Your husband dismantled this family when he had a security guard walk me through a restaurant exit, like I was some kind of vagrant. My voice didn't waver. He wanted to instruct everyone on what separates successful people from poor ones. I'm simply continuing that lesson with more practical material. Dad, please, we'll apologize. We'll make everything right. Brent was wrong. I can see that now. But apologies don't reach back and undo humiliation, sweetheart. Every choice carries a consequence. Then tell me what you want from us. I want you to feel what it means to be without power, to have another person hold the switch that controls whether you can afford your basic dignity. I walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the neighborhood I actually lived within my means to afford. Your husband called me a beggar. Starting tomorrow, he gets a practical education in what that word actually means. You can't leave us with nowhere to go. We'll end up homeless. You have the same options available to every working person. Spend carefully live at your actual income level. Find an apartment that fits the budget. The line went quiet except for her breathing ragged and uneven. This isn't over, she said at last, barely above a whisper. No, I agreed. It isn't. After she hung up, I poured myself a glass of bourbon and sat in the stillness of my small house. For the first time since Sunday night, I felt something resembling peace. Tomorrow, the young couple would wake up to a different kind of morning. I found myself wondering how much pressure their marriage could take before the seams showed. The next morning, I was halfway through the quarterly reports when the phone rang. Nadine's name was on the screen, but the timing was wrong. Too precise, too deliberate to be another wave of panic. Dad. Her voice had changed registers, entirely quieter now, almost tender. I've been sitting with our conversation from last night, and I'm genuinely worried about you. I set my coffee down with some care. Worried? In what way? You haven't been yourself. People around you are saying you're going through some kind of breakdown, that these decisions about Brent's position and our finances aren't rational. The words came out too cleanly, too rehearsed. You're not the father I recognize. People. I leaned back in the leather armchair. Which people specifically? People who love you. People who are frightened you're not in a clear headspace right now. A brief pause, and then Mom wouldn't want you tearing the family apart over a misunderstanding at dinner. The mention of Carolyn found exactly the mark it was aimed at, but it also told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't Nadine talking. These were lines written for her, chosen with surgical care for maximum emotional yield. What do you believe actually happened at that dinner? Sweetheart Brent explained it all. He said you felt humiliated by a conversation about business, and now you're taking it out on our entire family. Her voice wobbled just slightly. Dad, these games need to stop. You need to undo what you've done. Brent doesn't deserve to lose his career because of your hurt feelings. Hurt feelings, I said, repeating it back slowly and deliberately. Is that what he told you? It was. She hesitated, then pivoted. Maybe speaking with a professional about this anger would help. There are professionals who can help you work through whatever's driving this behavior. That suggestion that I needed mental health intervention was all the confirmation I required. Brent had spent the night constructing this angle, framing me as erratic and unstable, while casting himself as the calm, reasonable target of a bitter old man's irrational crusade. Nadine, those aren't your words. That's not how you speak, not how your mind works. Those are his arguments coming out through your mouth. I'm trying to help you see this clearly, Dad. You're dismantling your own daughter's life, your grandchildren's future. Her voice fractured with something real, now the rehearsed script momentarily slipping. We could lose our house. We can't afford groceries with the cards cut off. And who bears responsibility for that? You're the one who she caught herself, and I could almost see Brent's hand cutting the air in warning. You're the one who isn't thinking straight right now. I moved to the window and stood looking out at the modest neighborhood I actually called home, where I had always lived, even while quietly bankrolling their upscale existence from a distance. My thinking is cleaner than it's been in years, I said evenly. Clear enough to spot a manipulation when I'm inside one. Clear enough to see that my own daughter would rather call her father unhinged than acknowledge her husband's record. I'm not. She was crying now. Whatever coaching she had arrived with was dissolving under the weight of the emotion. You've made your choice, Nadine. You took his version of events over mine. You put his financial comfort ahead of my dignity. You chose to question my mental state rather than hold him to any kind of account. Dad, please, I'm just trying to. You're trying to get me to reinstate benefits that were never legitimately earned. You're trying to leverage family guilt and amateur psychology to make me behave as though Sunday night was nothing. The line went still, only her broken breathing filling the silence. Everything is very clear to me now, I said, including the fact that you are not simply a bystander in this situation. You are a willing participant. I ended the call before she could answer. For a long stretch, I stood at that window, absorbing the true dimensions of the betrayal. My daughter hadn't merely sided with her husband. She had actively participated in attempting to gaslight her own father, manufacturing doubt about his mental state to shield their comfortable lives. The phone rang immediately. I let it run to voicemail. And again. And again. I silenced the ringer and went back to my desk. There were other calls to make, other adjustments to put into motion. If Nadine wanted to wage psychological warfare, she could sit through the same education in earned versus given success, beginning with her own standing at the company. That evening, my doorbell rang with the careful, measured sound of people who had rehearsed the moment. Gerald and Patrice Holcomb stood on my front porch in their best clothes, holding themselves with the composed, diplomatic posture of parents who had arrived to negotiate on behalf of their child. Warren Gerald extended his hand with practiced warmth. Thank you for seeing us on such short notice. I brought them into the living room, watching their eyes do the quiet inventory of the space. Quality furniture, original artwork, the understated signifiers of real wealth rather than performed wealth. They settled into the leather armchairs with the careful courtesy of people who had come with prepared remarks. We're hoping to find a path toward resolving this. Gerald began, his voice carrying the measured cadence of a man accustomed to business negotiations. Obviously, there's been some kind of misunderstanding between you and Brent, and we'd like to help find a workable solution. Patrice leaned forward with maternal urgency. Family bonds are irreplaceable, Warren. It pains us to see this straining everyone, most of all the grandchildren's future. What kind of solution did you have in mind? I asked, genuinely interested in what they thought they were walking into. Well, Gerald cleared his throat. We gather there may have been some professional friction, perhaps some hurt feelings around the dinner incident. We'd be willing to compensate you for any losses or inconvenience you've experienced. The offer drifted between us like an olive branch held out over a canyon that had no other side. This isn't a matter of money, Gerald. I kept my voice measured. It's a matter of respect and accountability of people learning that their choices carry weight. Surely there's a middle ground here somewhere. Patrice pressed, her hope still visible. Some path to restoring things without leaving permanent damage to the family. I studied both their faces, genuine love, genuine worry, the desperate optimism of people who believe every problem can eventually be bought or talked into submission. They had no real picture of what they were sitting across from. Let me explain what actually took place, I said quietly. Your son called me a beggar in front of my own daughter. He had security walk me out of a restaurant as though I were a vagrant who'd wandered in off the street. He spent 3 years receiving help he never knew existed, and then he publicly humiliated the person who had made his entire lifestyle possible. The color left their faces gradually as the true shape of it settled over them. We had no idea it had become so personal, Patrice said softly. Brent described it as a business disagreement, some kind of workplace politics. Your son has been living entirely on charity for 3 years. Fabricated references, manufactured bonuses, covered failures, protected positions. Everything he believed he had earned on merit was actually a gift from the very man he called a beggar. Gerald's business instincts were running, now working through the numbers, gauging the scale. The company, how large is Delacroix Construction? Exactly. Large enough that your compensation offer, generous as it may be, wouldn't account for a single month of the support I've been quietly extending to your son. They exchanged a glance, and in that look, I could see the moment the real power dynamic registered: their family business success, their comfortable circumstances, their assumption that a check could solve most things, all of it suddenly small, against the scale of what sat across from them. Some things aren't available for purchase or negotiation, I went on. Respect, dignity, family loyalty. These don't have a market rate. Gerald gave a slow nod, the diplomatic composure giving way to something more honest. We appreciate you receiving us and explaining the full picture, Warren. This is beyond what we can fix. After they were gone, I poured a glass of bourbon and settled into the quiet of my living room. The young couple had now run through every option available to them. Direct confrontation, emotional manipulation, parental intervention. They were standing alone inside the consequences of what they'd chosen. By Thursday morning, 1 week exactly from the restaurant, Brent had lined up 3 interviews. I heard this through Curtis, who mentioned picking it up from someone in accounting. Roanoke's professional business community was considerably smaller than most people accounted for. He seems certain about his prospects, Curtis noted over our morning coffee, telling people he's looking for something better, suited to what he's capable of. I nearly smiled at that particular piece of self-delusion. Brent's first interview was at Valley View Marketing, a mid-sized regional firm handling campaigns for local businesses. I happened to know their creative director, Roxanne Felt, from years of industry gatherings. Her standards were exacting, her technical questions pointed and unsparing. The interview ran 20 minutes, 15 minutes longer than it warranted, almost certainly out of professional courtesy. Can you walk us through your most successful campaign and the specific metrics behind it? Roxanne would have asked, as she did with every candidate. Brent's answer would have been evasive, retreating into generalities. I managed multiple high-impact projects that significantly improved brand visibility and client engagement. What conversion rates did you actually hit? What was the ROI on your budget? The silence that would have followed said everything. By Tuesday, Valley View, Marketing, Blue Ridge, Creative, and Summit Communications had all passed on him. The feedback ran in the same direction each time, strong-looking resume, but no ability to demonstrate concrete results, or the technical fluency his claimed experience implied. Back at the house, Nadine had started the systematic dismantling of the life they had built. I drove by one evening and spotted the garage sale signs, tables laid out with jewelry, electronics, designer furniture. Things I had indirectly paid for through artificial bonuses and inflated benefits now being sold off to cover ordinary bills. We have to be honest about where we are, she would have told Brent that night, the rooms around them half emptied and the stack of invoices growing. The jewelry alone should carry us through rent for 3 months, maybe 4, if we're disciplined. This is temporary, he would have pushed back, his certainty cracking at the edges, but not yet gone. I'll find the right opportunity. These companies just don't know what they're looking at when it's in front of them, but the market had its own read on things, specifically the gap between manufactured credentials and actual professional ability. His fourth interview was at a small startup that couldn't afford to be particular. Even they declined, pointing to gaps in his practical experience with digital marketing tools and analytics platforms. The fifth company never returned the call at all. By the close of the week, Brent had exhausted nearly every marketing opening in Roanoke that matched what he considered an appropriate salary. The remaining possibilities were either entry-level roles paying a fraction of his former artificially inflated income, or positions demanding technical skills he had simply never developed. Whatever savings they had managed to set aside beyond the lifestyle they had constructed to impress everyone around them wouldn't stretch past 2 months. The house they were renting demanded more than Nadine's salary alone could cover. Car payments, insurance, utilities, the basic costs of keeping up appearances in a neighborhood they'd chosen for its prestige. Every bit of it had been quietly propped up by benefits they'd never once recognized as the handouts they truly were. I caught myself browsing rental listings in less fashionable parts of town. Small apartments, modest little houses, the kind of places people call home when they live on. Nothing more than what they've actually worked for. Sooner or later, Brent would have to face the math. Take entry-level work at a third of what he used to make or keep, holding out for doors that were never going to open. Pride against necessity. The same brutal equation I'd been forced to run through more times than I could count, all while watching the two of them spend lavishly on my quiet generosity. The ledger was finally square. Friday evening, exactly 1 week after the restaurant incident, my doorbell rang soft, almost apologetic. I swung the door open to find Nadine on my porch, not the polished, self-assured woman who'd tried to work me 3 days earlier. Her shoulders had caved inward, her eyes were raw and red, and the composed exterior she always maintained had been replaced by the hollow look of someone who had finally run out of road. "Dad," she said softly, her voice barely carrying. I came to apologize. We were completely wrong about everything. I moved aside to let her in, watching how she stepped carefully, tentatively, the way a person walks on ice that has already begun to crack. She settled into the same chair where she'd sat as a girl doing homework, where we'd spent so many evenings talking about her dreams and what she wanted her life to become. Now she sat with her hands folded in her lap, looking less like a grown woman than a child who knew exactly what she'd done. "I never understood how much you carried for us all those years." She went on, fresh tears spilling. The job, the bonuses, the car, the help with the house. Everything Brent believed he'd earned on his own merits was actually a gift from you. And She shook her head, the sentence dying before she could finish it. Go on," I said quietly. "We took all of it for granted. Worse, we looked down on you for it. We told ourselves we were the successful ones, and you were just..." She pressed the back of her hand to her eyes. "We were so ungrateful, so cruel." For the first time since that Sunday night, something shifted in my chest, beyond cold satisfaction. This was my daughter, genuinely shattered, genuinely sorry, finally grasping the full weight of what she'd thrown away. "The job interviews were a disaster," she whispered. "No one would take him. They saw right away that his resume didn't hold up. And our savings are gone. We'll lose the house next month." "What is it you want from me, Nadine? Please." She raised her eyes to mine, desperate and unguarded. "Give Brent one more chance. Give us both the chance to show you we understand now. We'll take any conditions, any position, any salary, whatever you think is fair." I read her face like a document. The arrogance had been scrubbed clean from it. The expectation that problems could be dissolved with a little family pressure or clever maneuvering had been stripped away entirely by the reality she'd collided with. This was never about charity, Nadine. Not once. It's always been about respect, about understanding where everything you have comes from, and who cared enough to make your lives possible. I know that now. We both do. If Brent gets another chance, he comes in at the bottom. No preferential treatment, no shortcuts, no inflated titles. Every promotion, every raise, every benefit earned through what he actually produces. And if he fails again, that door closes for good. Whatever you think is right, Dad. We trust your judgment. The front door opened quietly. Brent stepped inside, looking like a man who'd aged 5 years and 5 days. His expensive clothes hung loose, his once confident bearing replaced by the hunched posture of someone defeat had thoroughly worked over. "Mr. Delacroix," he said formally, as though we were strangers being introduced. "Nadine told me she was coming to speak with you. I wanted to add my apology to hers. Sit down, Brent." He took the chair next to Nadine, his hands not quite steady. "I was wrong about everything about you, about what I was actually capable of, about what I deserved versus what I had handed to me. I see clearly now that every win I thought was mine was really your doing. I'll accept whatever position you're willing to offer, any salary, any terms. I only want the chance to earn my place instead of having it built for me." I looked at the two of them, my daughter and her husband flattened by reality, at last, prepared to build something on a foundation that would hold. "Then we start over," I said. Honestly this time. Monday morning arrived with the crisp efficiency of fresh starts and second chances. I sat behind my walnut desk in the Delacroix Construction Executive Suite, watching Loretta Dunbar arrange employment contracts with the methodical precision of someone who understood that today marked more than routine paperwork. Nadine and Brent walked into my office at exactly 9 o'clock, their punctuality itself a small act of respect. They moved with the careful deference of people who had learned the difference between entitlement and opportunity, settling into the chairs across from my desk with postures that acknowledged both my authority and their own gratitude. "Let's formalize what we discussed," I said, gesturing toward the documents Loretta had prepared. "These contracts reflect standard market rates and standard performance expectations. No artificial inflation, no special considerations beyond what any other employee would receive." Brent leaned forward and studied the pages closely. "Junior Marketing Coordinator," he read aloud. "Starting salary of $38,000 with advancement tied to documented performance metrics." "Exactly half what your previous artificial salary was," I said, "but twice what most people your age are making when they're genuinely beginning their careers." "I understand completely and I accept," he said quietly. "Thank you for this opportunity." Loretta walked them through the performance evaluation criteria, the advancement timeline, the expectations for client work and project management. Every clause was standard policy, the same bar set for any employee building a career through honest effort. For Nadine, the changes were less dramatic, but no less significant. Her HR position stayed intact, but the inflated bonuses and cushion benefits she'd grown accustomed to were gone. Market salary, standard vacation, health insurance you earn rather than assume. "Your daughter will need to prove herself the same as anyone else," I told them both. "Nepotism ends here. Advancement comes through performance, not bloodlines." "We wouldn't have it any other way," Nadine said, and her voice carried conviction. "We've learned what it actually means to earn something." After Loretta left with the signed contracts, I came around from behind the desk and sat in the chair beside them, a quiet shift from employer to father. "In our personal relationship," I said directly, "respect and gratitude are not optional. No more taking what I offer as a given. No more assuming that being family entitles you to anything beyond love and second chances." "We'll never forget again, Dad." Nadine promised, her eyes bright with tears she was holding back. "Not what you've already done for us, and not what you're doing right now." Brent extended his hand not as the arrogant son-in-law who had once called me a beggar, but as a man who finally grasped what earned respect actually costs. "Thank you, Mr. Delacroix. I won't let you down this time." I shook it firmly. Then we moved forward together on honest terms. They left my office to begin their first day of legitimate work, walking with the measured stride of people who understood that whatever came next depended entirely on themselves. I watched through the window as they crossed the parking lot toward the building entrance, no longer scanning for reserved spaces or expecting a path to be cleared for them. The restaurant incident felt like ancient history now, though barely 10 days had passed since that Sunday evening. In those 10 days, justice had run its natural course not through revenge or cruelty, but through the simple, unsparing consequence of letting people meet the reality of their own choices. I picked up my coffee and settled back into my leather armchair, surveying the Delacroix construction empire I had built across decades of honest work. My phone would ring soon with business calls. My calendar would fill with legitimate meetings. My company would keep thriving under actual leadership. And at the end of the day, I would go home, carrying the quiet satisfaction of a man who had taught his family the most valuable lesson of all that respect. Like success can only truly be yours when it has been genuinely earned. The scales were perfectly balanced. If you've stayed with me this far, thank you. I mean that. Looking back on all of it, the years of quiet covering the manufactured wins, the pride I swallowed watching them spend, what I quietly provided, I can honestly say the hardest part wasn't letting it collapse. It was admitting I'd built the cage myself. I believe God has a way of bringing hidden things into the light at exactly the right moment. Not to destroy us, but to give us the chance to start over on honest ground. That Sunday evening at the restaurant cost me something. But what it gave back a daughter who finally sees clearly and a son-in-law who finally understands what earning something actually feels like was worth every bit of it. Here is what this dad's revenge taught me and what I hope you carry with you. Never confuse silence for approval. The people you quietly support can mistake your patience for weakness if you never draw a line. If you've been propping someone up, ask yourself whether you're helping them grow or just helping them hide. Real love sometimes means removing the safety net and trusting the other person to find their feet. And remember, respect that isn't earned isn't really respect. It's just comfort wearing a disguise. This has been a family revenge story that I think a lot of us recognize in one form or another. If it moved you, if it reminded you of something you've been through, share it with someone who might need to hear it today. And if you haven't already subscribed to Dad's Revenge, there are more stories here, each one carrying a truth worth sitting with. Leave me a comment and tell me what you thought. I read them, and they mean more than you know. Take care of yourself. Until next time.